Sea flooding are improving now, and there are currently no flood warnings in the province.
Both James and Jennifer Crumbly failed to ask their son if he had his gun with him or where his gun was located.
And criminal charges have been laid against the parents of a 15-year-old school shooting suspect in Michigan. Thanks for tuning in. With more cases of the Omicron variant and fresh data of vaccines waning effectiveness over time, booster shots are now being recommended for those over 50. And as CTV's Christine reports, experts say it's just another layer of protection against COVID-19.
Adults over the age of 50 are now strongly urged to get a booster or third dose.
We're most concerned about severe outcomes in those who are elderly or have other higher risk conditions.
This recommendation comes from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization amid concerns over the spread of the Omicron variant and a potential Delta surge. New data shows protection against COVID could decrease over time for those who are double vaxxed.
There is certainly a direction of travel in terms of the waning of the vaccine's effectiveness over time against asymptomatic infection and any symptoms.
According to NACI, boosters should also be prioritized for people who receive 2 doses of AstraZeneca or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson, certain immunocompromised individuals, frontline healthcare workers, and adults in Indigenous communities.
We are better protected individually and collectively when we all do our best to maintain layers of protection.
NACI also says 18 to 49-year-olds may also be offered a booster 6 months after their second dose, based on individual risks and where they live. Some provinces have already started approving booster shots. Ontario will offer boosters for 50 and up starting December 13th.
We will likely be moving down to lower ages in due course, but right now we're taking it in order of need and effectiveness.
The federal government has also signed a deal with Pfizer and Merck to purchase an antiviral COVID medication pending Health Canada approval. 1 million of Pfizer's pills and 500,000 of Merck's pills, with an option of an additional 500,000. Christine CTV News, Ottawa.
And let's now bring in Dr. Christopher Modi. He is the head of the University of Calgary's Department of Microbiology, Immunology and Infectious Diseases. Doctor, good evening, and thank you for your time here on CTV News Channel.
Happy to do it.
Now, there is clarity on booster shots that was long awaited. Now that NACI has a plan in place, what do you think?
Well, I think it really reflects what the literature, the publications are showing, and we're seeing more and more publications that indicate that immunity does wane. There are, lots of variability in the publications, but basically another study published just last week in 40-year-old healthcare workers showed that immunity lasted for about 300 days. And so, we know that even in younger people, it wanes, and we would expect that it would wane even more in patients that have immunocompromised conditions or are more elderly than that.
But Dr. Modi, let me ask you this. The question now is whether this is a 3-dose regime vaccine program or more. How will we know? Because yes, there are reports indicating that the immunity is waning. Will it be only 3 or could it be more? How can we say?
Well, I think it's a very dynamic situation, Akshay. It's really an issue of what's coming our way. And so it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, 6 months down the road from now. We may be dealing with another variant. We may be, in a very different situation because there's more data available. So I don't know that, we're talking about a 4th dose or anything like that right now. We're just trying to catch up to the literature and provide the best series of vaccinations that we can.
In the beginning of this pandemic, you would recall, Doctor, there was a lot of talk about reaching herd immunity. A lot was said about that and saying that there will be a time when X amount of population will be vaccinated and we will not have to worry about this pandemic that much. But look at us now. Canada is doing very well with its vaccination rate. And here we are with yet another variant. So people are beginning to ask about the immunity aspect of it and how far will we continue to need these, vaccines or boosters or pills for that matter. And when does the pandemic end? Because it's going to be close to 2 years now.
It's an excellent question. And, when we started vaccinations, we thought that we could achieve, so-called herd immunity when we got to about 70 or 75%. It's now clear that that's not going to happen. And, of course, if we could get to 90% or so, we would be much closer to herd immunity. But I think that we're actually, even if we got to that level of immunity, we're still going to need some restrictions. We'd need less restrictions than if 70 or 80% of the population is vaccinated. So if we get to 90%, the restrictions will be less. But it's likely that there will be some restrictions needed. And we're starting to see that in European countries that are now having another wave.
That's correct. Dr. Modi, as days are passing, we are learning more and more about this latest variant, Omicron. What do we know about how is it impacting the current immunity for those who are fully vaccinated?
Yeah, so basically when we think about immunity, the analogy that I use is antibodies are like a mold. And what you do is the protein is like a string with a bunch of beads on it. Every bead is different. And so you put that into the mold, and if another virus comes along with exactly that same string of beads, the mold fits perfectly and immunity is great. The problem is that when you get something like Omicron, a number of beads are changed. And when the beads are changed, the mold doesn't fit anymore, and so the antibody is less effective. What we don't know, and will soon be available, is how well does the mold that we're using now, due to the current vaccines, generated by the current vaccines, how well does that fit the Omicron variant? And, the concern is that there are a lot of changes in those beads in the area where the antibodies from vaccines bind. And so that's really the question. We don't know how well those antibodies are going to bind. Are they going to bind a little bit? Yeah, they're probably going to bind a little bit, but is it going to be enough to generate immunity? That's really the question.
Right. Dr. Modi, really appreciate you simplifying this Omicron variant for all of us. There's so many questions still, but really appreciate your time. That's Christopher Modi, head of the University of Calgary's Department of Microbiology, Immunology and Infectious Diseases. Thanks once again.
Thanks very much.
Now, Quebec is reporting more than 1,300 new COVID-19 cases today. It's Quebec's highest daily case count since April. The province also reporting 2 more deaths. Hospitalizations have increased to 230 and 57 people are in intensive care units. Ontario is confirming its first case of the Omicron variant in someone under the age of 12. York Region health officials say the child is too young to be vaccinated and recently traveled to Southern Africa with a family member. Now, there are 2 other individuals in the home who have tested positive for COVID-19, but it's not yet clear if it's the same variant. All 3 are isolating. And some Canadians say they've had anything but a smooth journey home after making a trip across the border. That's because of confusion over COVID-19 travel restrictions. Here's CTV's Austin Delaney with more.
Enforcing something.
Lori Fonseca still reeling and still in isolation.
And how is it that I come across the border and you're judge and jury and you have sentenced me to house arrest for 14 days? This just doesn't make sense.
Fully vaccinated coming through the Rainbow Bridge, but ordered by a Canada Border Security agent to 14 days isolation after not having filled out the ArriveCan app following a 7-hour shopping trip to Buffalo. And today, hearing from others in the same boat.
One is an essential healthcare worker who is triple vaccinated.
And cannot go to work for 14 days and too afraid to go public for fear of retribution. None allowed to pull aside and fill out the app at the bridge to Canada. At Pearson, flying in today, a different story.
No issues. I didn't even have my ArriveCan checked. on the way in.
Catherine Cam, visiting from Wisconsin, reminded by her airline to fill out the ArriveCAN app.
You weren't issued a boarding pass until you checked all the different boxes, including ArriveCAN.
Stefan, arriving from Dubai.
They won't let you on the plane unless you filled it out.
Fonseca says she gets passed from one authority to another, trying to find a way out.
It is just one slew of phone calls after another, and everybody says, I don't have the power or authority to lift quarantine. Call this number, see if you can. And sometimes you're waiting on line 45 minutes to an hour, only to be told, we can't do anything for you. Give this number a call.
Asking why she can't just get a test. Austin Delaney, CTV News.
To some other news making headlines now, some positive inputs out of waterlogged British Columbia. The BC government says there are currently no flood warnings and no rain in the forecast. Now, this is helping the province's disrupted supply chains improve.
We've now seen over 10,000 trucks move products around our province. CP Rail has been moving freight. CN is working toward a mainline reopening between Kamloops and Vancouver, expected this weekend. Airlines have continued to increase their cargo flight.
Transportation Minister Rob Fleming also says some major highways will remain closed for a while as construction work continues. He says there will be substantial costs to rebuild damaged infrastructure to a better standard. And south of the border now, the U.S. added 210,000 jobs last month, but that fell well short of expectations. The Dow Jones had forecast a boost of more than 570,000 new jobs, more than double of what the actual gain was. The sectors showing the largest growth in November include professional and business services, transportation, warehousing and construction. In other developments now, jurors at the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell learned more today about what happened inside Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. A former house manager testified that numerous young women came to finance her home, including 2 females who appeared to be underage. He identified one of the girls as the woman identified in court as Jane, who testified this week. He says he picked Jane up on multiple occasions to Maxwell's request, driving her to Epstein's home and plane. Jane claims she was abused at both locations.